right. Hello, everyone. My name is Aubrey Safaria, and I'm the current president of Uni Psychi chapter. And I'm here with Professor Perazio, who's an animal behavior professor. If you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. I'm Professor Christina Perazio. I am an assistant teaching professor in the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and I primarily teach courses for animal behavior and psychology and some neuroscience students as well.
So I'm going to be asking you a couple questions about what animal behavior students might be able to do once they've obtained their degree from uni. I'm a neuroscience student, so this will be very informative to me as well.
Great.
So what are some of the options for somebody who's about to graduate with a bachelor's in animal behavior?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think it's one of the biggest questions we get a lot from parents also at those like accepted students day. They're like, what is my kid going to do with a degree of animal behavior, especially, right? The answer is a lot. There's a lot of options. I mean, some of the kind of big track possibilities are veterinary school, right? Some of our students want to go on to vet school. They do the pre-vet track. They apply to veterinary school. That's more schooling to open up their own practice or be a large animal vet of some sort. One of the most common paths is applied behavior. So these are students that want to go on and work in a zoo, work in a wildlife rehabilitation center, work in an aquarium, work at an animal shelter, kind of the sky's the limit, open their own training facility, do animal assisted therapy. So that's another kind of big bracket. Conservation is also popular. So similarly, a lot of applied stuff, but also there's options to work for like non-governmental organizations like Fish and Wildlife, either at the state level or the international level. Working with a nonprofit conservation organization is another option. And so you can kind of, if you're interested in like the business side of things, you might work in a nonprofit with animals, but you might bring some sort of like marketing or business help to them. It kind of depends on how you've kind of made your time at UNE and if you've got a minor or something like that. And then research, which is maybe not the most popular, but actually we do get a fair amount of students who want to go on to graduate school. They want to teach, they want to lead their own research initiatives, again, for some sort of governmental organization or non-governmental organizations or at a university. I think those are some of the main kind of options that our students go with. Yeah. So there's a lot, which is also overwhelming.
I mean, as all degrees are.
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like you've touched on this already, but there's kind of two main branches I feel like you can either do. You can continue on to grad school and go to your research stuff, your governmental positions, or you can run with your bachelor's and get all these really cool jobs. Can you kind of help us differentiate between those two?
Absolutely. So going to graduate school is great in a lot of ways, but it's a huge commitment in a lot of ways. And not every career requires graduate school, right? So if you want to teach, if you want to be a part of research initiatives or lead research initiatives, you need to get a graduate degree. Now, if you want to be a part of research, but not necessarily what we refer to as a PI or the principal investigator, a master's is usually sufficient. But if you want to teach at a university, or if you want to be the one designing the studies and kind of leading them and applying for grants and all kinds of stuff like that, a PhD is what you're going to end up getting. That's the terminal degree that you'd get. Now, if your focus is more applied stuff, you want to work in a zoo, an aquarium, with a nonprofit, for a shelter, for a conservation organization, you don't necessarily need to go to graduate school. You might in some kind of creative ways, but the key for that is experience. Those jobs want you to have hands-on experience in the field, with the animals, doing the stuff, feeding them, doing enrichment, doing training, things like that. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, whether or not you're going to kind of go to graduate school or whether you're going to really try to beef up that experience part of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the most important things I feel like. Do we do internships in animal behavior?
We sure do. Yep. Our students are required to do at least one 3-credit internship. And we do that on purpose because a lot of jobs, it's kind of like a vicious circle because they're like, they want you to have experience. But then it's also hard to get paid with the animal stuff. So it's like, we want you to have all this experience, but we're not going to pay you for it. We're also not going to hire you until you get it, which is why we want you to get hands-on while you're at the university, because it's one of your best options. And so we encourage students to do more than one internship too, because again, that experience is what sets you apart, plus your animal behavior degree, from other applicants.
Definitely. So speaking of applications, if one wants to continue on to grad school, how could they start looking for degrees, and maybe how do they start that?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially for animal behavior students, because if you type in, master's program or graduate program or whatever in animal behavior, you might find a few things and then you might find yourself kind of stumped, because oftentimes the graduate programs aren't called a master in animal behavior, a PhD in animal behavior. They fall under all kinds of names. So sometimes they're just in biology departments. Sometimes they're under behavioral ecology. Sometimes they're under psychology. Another really common one is some sort of combination of evolution, ecology, and behavior, kind of lumped together, often referred to as EEB. There's a lot of universities that have EEB programs. So you need to get a little creative if you're just going to type in like graduate degree in X. The thing with finding a college is finding the college, right? You find a college that fits, they have the major that you like, it's in a location that you like. Graduate school is about the advisor, at least in this field. And I think it's similar in some other fields. So you find the person who does stuff that's similar to what you want to do, and who you're going to mesh with. And so how do you do that, right? Well, to some degree, Googling will get you somewhere, right? But the other thing to do is to look at papers, the papers that you're reading in classes, the papers that you're reading as a part of your research lab. If you're doing an internship in some sort of setting and you're learning about X individual who developed X type of training protocol or something, you look that person up. If it's the author of a paper, you look that author up. And if they have a lab, you find their lab, website, and then you can get an idea of what do they do and what do their students do. Most of these advisors will have a listing of students on their lab webpage, and you can see what their projects are. And then when you get up the courage, you reach out and you send kind of a brief email and say, hey, this is who I am. This is why I'm specifically interested in you. Here's my CV. Would you have time to chat? Are you accepting graduate students in the future? And then you see where it goes. And then eventually, you chat with the advisor, you want to chat with the students. There's, that whole other process. So there's a lot of different things you can do to make it a little bit less overwhelming.
Definitely. So I'm in the throes of that right now. I understand the overwhelming part.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. So let's see. For these students, let's say they get accepted to their dream grad school, they've matched with the perfect advisor. What is kind of the progression they can expect going through either a master's or a PhD with an emphasis on animal behavior?
Sure. Again, here, there's options and differences, right? So like you could do a Master of Science program, but even then, some schools have thesis and non-thesis options. So a thesis option is basically like a mini dissertation. You don't always have to collect the data for the study. A lot of times you'll use archival data that your advisor has done, but you write a thesis and you orally propose it and you orally defend it, and it's a whole thing, and you take the coursework. So usually that will last a good 3 years on average. Could be a little bit shorter, could be a little bit longer. So that's a master's option. There's also the option of getting a PhD, and there's two kind of routes to do that. You could apply straight out of undergraduate to a PhD program where you don't even get a master's, you just go and you get a PhD, and you're probably going to be in that program for an average of 6 years, depends. Or there are some programs that kind of award you with a master's along the way. Like you might do a smaller project along the way and they kind of give you a master's. Or you get accepted to a PhD program, but you have to do a master's first. So you'll take the master's coursework, you'll do the master's thesis, you'll finish that, but then instead of having to reapply, you just kind of keep going and you take the extra PhD courses and then you do your dissertation. And I mean, those programs, if you average 3 years to finish your master's and another at least probably 3 years to finish your dissertation. But the timing really depends on the program, and also you as a person, and how long it takes you to get through things. Some PhD students are working on the side, although some programs don't allow you to have outside jobs, which is, I think, something important to keep in mind. But you want to be funded. You don't want to pay for your PhD. You want to get funding. You fight tooth and nail to get funding if you can. You've already paid enough for undergraduate degree.
Oh, definitely. And can people who are going through, let's say they chose the PhD route, can they expect to do postdocs, internships?
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably, right? Like if you're getting a PhD, you probably want to do research in some capacity. Not everyone, there are exceptions. But if you want to do research, if you want to have graduate students working with you, and if you want to lead research initiatives, in order to get any of those positions, at a university, a tenure track research position at a university, or even a research position with an organization like NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, those high up coveted research positions, you're going to need a postdoc. So a postdoc is it's like the next step beyond a PhD, but it's better because you get paid, and you don't have to pay for it, but you do a project. So it's kind of, and you have an advisor. So it's kind of like that in-between step between your PhD to like being thrust out into the real world. You still have an advisor, you're still under the umbrella of a university, but you're getting money and you have a lot more independence, and you might have undergraduate students working with you, or master's students working, or even dissertation students, PhD students working with you. Yeah, so most students will end up going on doing a postdoc if research is where they want to be. Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a couple more questions for you. The first one is, which path did you choose, and why did you decide to go down that path?
I feel like my story is one that reminds students, which is good for you to hear too, that there is no one path. Even if like I am a neuroscience major, right? I want to do X. What is the path to X? Probably many paths to X. So I graduated from UNE in Dr. D's lab as a research assistant. I graduated and I was accepted to start that following fall into a PhD program where I was supposed to get my master's first and then keep going to get my PhD. And I was, thrilled, so excited. And I did it. I moved to Mississippi, which was totally foreign for me. And there were a lot of great things and a lot so great things. And my path ended up taking me that I got my master's and I left the program. I did not stay on to do my PhD. There were a lot of reasons for that. Some of it had to do with just how I fit in the program in terms of what my interests were. And I think the biggest, lesson I try to let my students know is that just because you want a PhD doesn't mean you need to enter a PhD program immediately after college. When we graduate college, we're often 22 years old, and you maybe only have had a year of research experience. Maybe you've had more if you knew early on and you got in, freshman or sophomore year, and you've been exposed to, relatively speaking, so little. And so, for example, I was like, I want to study marine mammals, probably dolphins, and I want to look at their social behavior and their communication, which sounds specific, and yet it's super broad, right? Social behavior, super broad. Communication, super broad. And as a graduate student, I got all these experiences and I narrowed my path, and it ended up turning out to be that what I really wanted to do wasn't necessarily what my advisor was the best person to be advising me at. And the program wasn't necessarily the best program. So I got my master's, I left, I did an internship, an unpaid internship with a master's degree. That felt great. But it turned into a paid position for a year. I was with Florida Fish and Wildlife. That was really great. I worked with manatees. I did a lot of waitressing and a lot of nannying and a lot of like life crisising and like, what the heck do I want to do? And I was like, okay, I do want to go back to my PhD. So then I was in the process again of like contacting advisor, who has funding, who's not retired, who's taking students, where do I want to live? And then in the middle of all of that, the visiting position at UNE opened up, wound up here. And then of course, got the permanent position, applied for it, stayed, and then went back to finish my PhD. So I'm a student and a professor at the same time, which there's a couple other professors at UNE that have done the same thing. It's not unheard of. So there's multiple paths. Just because you start on a path and it doesn't work out the way you think it's going to work out doesn't mean it's over. Having to waitress or nanny, even if have a master's degree, isn't the end of the world. It is what it is, as long as you're going towards something, right? So as I was waitressing and nannying, I was working on my research in Colombia on the side. Like, you keep doing something, getting some experience, volunteering at an animal shelter, volunteering at a vet clinic while you're working your other job to make money and figuring out what's going on. And as long as you're always doing something, you'll find your way. Some experience will kind of like become available and you'll take advantage of it, and you'll end up, doing something that you really love. And don't be afraid to take time, right? Like, if you're a senior and you're like, I don't know, I think I want to go to graduate school, but I don't know if I'm ready. Don't push yourself. Take a little bit of time, do something with that time, get an internship, volunteer, do something that's relevant and save some money at the same time. Don't lose momentum, but don't feel that the only path, if graduate school is your path, don't feel that the only way to do it is right away, because it's not. It's not.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really valuable piece of advice that not a lot of us get right off the bat.
Yeah. I wish I'd gotten it. I wish I'd known earlier, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's comforting to know that, you might have periods where you're not quite sure what you're going to do, but there are options. You just got to navigate and find them out.
Exactly. You're not going to land your dream career the day after you graduate from undergrad. Maybe you will. Maybe you're in a small percentage that will, and that's amazing. You probably won't, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean that you can't do it, and it doesn't mean that you wasted the last 4 years of your life, right? It's, especially right now, like finding a job, saving money, it's not easy. So don't, you don't have to land your dream career the second you graduate from UNE. Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me, Professor Perazio.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. If people have
good
more
luck as you continue on your path of applications and finding advisors and figuring out what you want to do. It's gonna be great.
Thank you.
Yeah.